Hello and welcome back to Insurance 101. I'm going to call this segment, I believe, things that you wouldn't believe that companies cover. AKA, I also like to say insurance companies protect us from some of our own stupidity. So I'm going to give you an example of what I mean when I say that. So at one point I was renting an apartment, and this particular apartment I was basically still going to school, working full time, doing what I had to do. So here it is. I'm sitting down at my computer. I had a date that day, and I needed to get ready and curl my hair. So I had the curling iron going in the bathroom. I needed to take a bath. I had the water running, and I also needed to finish a paper. And I had a cat, and I needed to clean the cat box. So what I did was I sat down, started all these projects, sat down at the computer, started typing out that paper, completely forgot that I left the water running in the bathtub. Now here it is. I get a knock at my door probably about a half an hour to 45 minutes later, so with this person that lived underneath me screaming at me, talking about there's water coming from the ceiling. And the only thing I could think of was, I am so grateful that I actually have renter's insurance, because renter's insurance covered what? My stupidity, due to the fact that I was liable for leaving the water running while trying to do, I want to say, multitasking, as they call it. So I was able to have that covered. So this segment is basically for all those things that you would not believe that would be covered underneath a policy. Now, I'm not going to get into all of them. I'm just going to give you a few. Like, someone said to me, I want to say maybe my niece and I were having a conversation, and she wanted to know if there was coverage, if there was insurance, if somebody laughed too hard and they died. And I thought that that was the funniest thing, but that a 10-year-old would think of. But however, I actually did do some research, and Lloyd's of London actually wrote policies for excess laughter in the event that people went to the movie theaters and they laughed and died too hard back in the 19th century. So I actually use Lloyd's of London now as an excess market. And when I say excess market, I mean, let's say that I have a home that most insurance companies won't write due to the fact that it won't fit into the underwriting guidelines, such as being too close to the water. If that is one of the factors, I can now say it excludes from all my regular markets, and I can go to my excess lines placements. And then at that particular point, I have to fill out affidavits, so on and so forth, and then I send them over, and then I would write them on Lloyd's of London paper or Scottsdale paper. So I found that very interesting. Now, in reference to people don't realize, like, I always hear a lot of people say when they get into a car accident, oh, I can't take off work because I can't afford to lose any pay. But as long as you actually have work loss underneath your policy, which is, and it's not limited work loss underneath your automobile policy, you would actually be covered for a portion of your lost earnings or your wages for while you were out of work. So that would actually be covered underneath part of the PIP coverage, which is on your auto policy. This is why I tell people to max out their PIP and make sure that you actually carry 175,000. Now, someone said to me, oh, I ended up basically having to pay out. I had a client who called me laughing, saying, I know that sounds outrageous, but I want to know if this is covered. And I said, well, what happened? So he's riding down the street, and here in the state of New York, I can tell you, those potholes that can be in Brooklyn, Queens, Jamaica, wherever, because we have such bad winters, those potholes can cause major damage and body out the undercarriage of your vehicle. So he did ask me, was that covered? And believe it or not, it is covered, but it is subject to your deductible. So if you have it would be considered to be covered underneath collision, underneath your deductible. So if you have a $500 deductible, you would lay out the first 500, and then insurance company would then supplement you for the rest. Someone else asked me if rodent damage was covered, and I had to ask them, please be more specific when you talk about rodent damage. So they advised me that basically they have this particular vehicle on their policy, and I call it a strip down policy. So they what he does is with this particular one vehicle during the winter time, he parks this vehicle. So it's basically like a Mustang. It's not a Mustang. It's more expensive than a Mustang, but I'm going to say it's like a Mustang, and basically where you don't really drive it too much in the winter because it'll fishtail out and it's not heavy enough. That body's not heavy enough in the back. So what he does is every single winter he will drop and suspend all coverages except for the comprehensive. So your comprehensive is your fire, theft, and vandalism, which and also considered to be acts of nature. So when I asked him, what do you mean by rodent damage? He said to me that basically, I guess a thing of mice or squirrels, I don't know what it was. They made a home underneath the undercarriage of his vehicle and then chewed the wires through the car, and then caused a lot of interior damage also, which I'm wondering how that happened, but that's not none of my concern. Guess he left I don't know if he left the window open or what, I have no idea, but I just find it very amazing that these animals are very creative during the winter. They're going to stay warm just like us. So they made a home within this particular vehicle, and then they chewed up some things, did some damage, left some babies, and he wanted to know if that was covered. So the answer is yes, that is actually covered. It's covered underneath something called that comprehensive. So even though he had that stripped down policy where he was able to suspend all the coverages except for the comprehensive on that particular car, he was covered for that. So it was still subject to the deductible. So whatever his deductible was, if he chose a $500 deductible or $1,000 deductible, he actually would pay out the first half of that. He would pay out the deductible, then the insurance company would then supplement him for the rest. So I found that that was very interesting. And then the last one is, which I have to say, when this coverage came into play in the state of New York, and I remember sitting in a meeting, and I was very young in my career. I will never forget it. The coverage that I'm talking about is called supplemental, what is it? It's called spousal liability coverage. So here it is in the state of New York. At one point, if you were in an accident and basically you and your husband were in an accident, you couldn't sue your spouse for anything. You couldn't sue your spouse because that was your spouse. It is what it is. You got into an accident, you're injured. I'm not going to say deal with it, but you know what I'm saying. You're injured, depending on if it was his fault or not. You might have to take care of that on the back end and do what you got to do and handle your business and handle your scandal with your husband. Just saying. Now here it is, I'm sitting in a meeting, they're going over different things that have now been released in the state of New York, and I think that Governor Pataki at the time was in office. I think Pataki was in office. So here it is, I'm sitting in a meeting, and now they come up with spousal liability. So I said, what in the world is spousal liability? So it actually will cover bodily injury it will cover bodily injury to a spouse because of the death or the injury that is basically caused by the husband or wife while they're in an auto accident, but you have to prove that your husband or spouse was negligent. So I will never forget it. Here it is. I'm sitting in the office. I get a phone call from one of and when I tell you the guy was a little older, I want to say he was probably in about his 90s, 80s, 90s. So he gives me a call and says, hey, me and my wife need some money. I said, okay, Mr., whatever your name is. And I said, well, you're going to have to elaborate what's going on. So he says, well, we were in an accident. And I said, okay. So then he says to me, well, she needs some money here. And I said, well, what does that have to, I don't really understand. So he states, well, what about that spousal liability? Can't she sue me? So at this point now I'm realizing that this particular coverage can open up a can of worms for fraud, which I tell people don't do it. So I had to ask him what happened in the accident. So he ended up telling me that he basically was following too closely and rear-ended someone else. So I asked him, was that done on purpose? Did you basically rear-end that person on purpose? And did you intentionally cause that accident to injure your wife? So he says no. But if you can basically prove that the conduct of your spouse was negligent and intentional, basically I guess that he tried to kill you while driving, then you can sue your own policy and collect underneath the spousal liability portion. Of course, it's for medical payments. Again, I still think that that's a coverage that opens up a can of worms, but you like it, I love it. Hey, these coverages come out, but these are just some interesting things that you did not think that would be covered that is actually covered. So I do like to say that insurance does cover stupidity, including my own. I should have been more careful in knowing I can't, multitask and do 50 things at one time like I'm about to run and do in a couple of minutes. So I just want to say thank you so much for watching Insurance 101 by Trusted Capital. And if this content is informational to you and you find it very helpful and resourceful, I want you to make sure that you hit that like button. And not only hit the like button, I need for you to also subscribe. Drop me a comment. Most of you actually do have my email address, and also my work information on my Instagram, on my Facebook page. I'm going to try and put links to all of that underneath my page for you. So I do apologize that it's taking me so long. I've just been doing about 5 different things. So please, I do apologize. But again, I want to say thank you so much for watching Insurance 101 by Trusted Capital. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so each time I actually release a video, you'll be notified automatically. Thank you so much, everyone, and you have a wonderful day.